Hey guys, welcome back to more neighbors. In this video, a neighbor tried to burn down my farm because I refused to sell him my land. Here is what happened. Let's dive right into the video. I thought I would post this here because it's been long enough and I wanted to share how karma comes around for the right people. So I own a farm, something that's been in my family for years. It is not huge, but it's large enough that we are able to grow a lot of different produce. Our farm started out as a 3-acre area, not really a farm by the technical sense, but has expanded over to 15 acres over the course of about 20 years. We are organic, one of the few farms that are, and take pride in that fact. And I have plans to expand even further within the next 5 years, as well as open up a market stall / farmers market for the locals. There were a few things that halted my plans for expansion, one of them being my neighbor Gary, not his real name. He is also a farmer and has about 10 acres of land and had been pressuring me for years to sell off some of my land to him. He apparently went to my father, who owned the farm before me, about the same thing nearly a decade ago, but my father refused. Gary had apparently tried to make an excuse that some of the land my father bought was technically his property, but the land was owned by the government and there was no record that Gary had ever utilized the land. There was a lot of paperwork and we thought that would be the end of it. I kept refusing Gary too, even when he would tell me how high a price he would pay for part of my land. It was getting to the point that I would go out of my way to avoid him if I saw him outside or when I was getting supplies around town. He never came on my property to ask about purchasing my land, at least not until last year during the summer when I was outside prepping my tractor for tilling. I got a barn that's a few feet away from the property line between his farm and mine, so he probably had been waiting for me to come out somewhere he could ambush me with another offer. The conversation we had was longer, but this was the part that I could remember. Gary, I want to make you one more offer. Me, Gary, please, we've talked about this. I'm not selling. Gary, but I'm sure you're looking for better equipment for what you've got, right? I could help pay that difference if you just sell me a few acres of the property. Me, I really don't know how many times I've made it clear to you, but I don't care how much you are willing to pay me. I'm not selling any part of my land and that is final. Gary, I will double what I offered last time. Me, I'm sorry, but I'm really busy right now. I have no intention of selling to you and I need you to just leave. But just consider, Gary, I want you off my property in the next 10 seconds or I'm calling the cops. This needs to stop. That seemed to do it and Gary all but stomped away, muttering to himself. I did not want to threaten the police, but I was just so tired of him constantly trying to get me to give up my land. I thought I had heard Gary say something about how I would regret my choice, but I figured he was just pissed that I wasn't scared of taking action against him. At the time I let it rest, figuring that he just needed to get some steam out from all of the times he tried to convince me and my family. I wanna say it was about 2 weeks after that when something happened. I had not heard from Gary and I figured that he finally took the hint and was not gonna keep pestering me. It was around 10 PM in the evening when I woke up to the smell of smoke. It was the summer, so fires were not uncommon in my area, but the smell was far too close for comfort and I ran outside to look for the source. I found it on my property. The barn where I stored my tractor and other planting tools, including fertilizer and seeds, had burst into flames. I ran back inside to get the rest of my family out of the house and I called 911. I did not want the fire to spread towards the areas of the farm I had just planted or the house, so I used the garden hose to get the nearby soil damp enough that it wouldn't catch on fire. I did not want to try and battle the flames in the barn, since I didn't know how the fire even started. My plan kind of worked, but there was some singing near my fields, but nothing reached the house. The fire department did not take too long to get over to the barn, but by the time they did, there wasn't much that could be done to save it. They put out the flames, checking around the area to make sure that there weren't smaller dry patches of grass that were in danger of lighting up. One of the firefighters checked up on me and my family, wanting to make sure we were okay. He said that he would need to file a report and wanted to confirm something with me. He took me around to the side of my now burnt down barn and pointed to something. It was a gasoline canister. The firefighter wanted to confirm if it was mine, since the fire smelled like gasoline when they were putting out the flames. Also, since it was outside the barn, that meant that someone had purposefully maybe started the fire. I explained that I'd been sleeping and the container was not mine. The firefighter told me that he would speak to the fire marshal about this and have an investigation, so I should not move anything until they were done. Thankfully, it didn't take long to finish the investigation. The fire marshal deemed it arson since they found a book of matches near the gasoline container the next morning. I did not have specific insurance on the barn, but I lost a lot of equipment and planting materials that would cost me a pretty penny to have replaced. The fire marshal said that I would have smelled like gasoline if I was the one that started the fire, and the canister was actually found on Gary's property, not mine. The marshal told me that they would get the police involved and see what they could find, and I told the marshal about Gary's last conversation with me, and he said that he would send the police over to get my full statement. The officers were nice, keeping my family at ease as they asked me questions about what had happened with Gary, what my relationship with him was, and what sort of threats did he make. I answered as best as I could, and the officers told me that they were gonna investigate before making any arrests, so they would be in touch. I spent the rest of the week with a few buddies working to take down the remains of the barn, with the permission of the police and fire marshal, since it had been a crime scene actually, but it was more of a hazard due to any dryness catching on fire again, and to salvage what I was able to from my supplies. About a week and a half after the fire, the police called and asked if I could come down to the station to go over a few things with them. When I got there, they explained that they had found where the gas canister was purchased, a local gas station less than 5 miles from my farm, and the cashier at the station was able to identify Gary as the one who bought it. Investigations further found evidence that he had taken out an insurance policy on his land. I realized that was probably the reason why the fire was set so close to his property line. If I had not woken up when I did, the fire would have spread and affected his own land. Because the fire started on my property, he could have found a way to blame me for the damage to his own property. After this revelation, I had to take a bit of time to compose myself. Did Gary do all of this just because I was not willing to give him my land? To have him take such drastic measures felt like an overreaction, but I thought back to just how insistent he had been, how upset he was every time I turned him down, how he had spent years trying to get myself and my father to try and give him some of our land. Maybe what I had said earlier had been the final straw. I told the police that if there was any other information they needed, I would happily give it to him. I also reached out to a lawyer after I left the station, ready to file charges against Gary for what he had done to my property. Gary was arrested after the police got all of the evidence together, getting him on charges of arson and attempted insurance fraud. At court, I was expecting him to try and deny the charges, but he did not even put up a fight. The evidence against him seemed just to be too much, and he pleaded guilty so that he could serve a shorter prison sentence. The judge also ordered him to pay for the damages to my property, the cost of a new barn, and the cost of the supplies that I lost in the fire. Apparently, Gary did not have the funds for all of that. A few months after he went to prison, his farm went into foreclosure. They held an auction for the land, and using the money from the case, I was able to purchase it. The opportunity was there and I decided to take it. It was moving up my plans for expansion by a few years, but having the property so close to mine without changing much would be a blessing. I was able to rebuild my barn and I was able to recoup my supplies so that I could expand the amount of crops I could grow at one time. Gary's land was also organic, but I held off on planting until I tested the soil. I did not trust him after the trial, and the last thing I needed was to find chemical pesticides in the soil. Once the test is done, I've got plans for new fields and maybe getting animals on the property. It's kind of a shame how things happened, and a part of me wonders if there ever was a way for Gary to be placated from his insistence on buying my family's land up. Could there have been some common ground that would have led us to an understanding, or was this whole situation meant to play out like it did? Either way, it's left a sour taste in my mouth, and I'm just glad that the whole situation is over and done with. And yeah guys, if you enjoyed the farmer stories, please don't forget to post some star emojis in the comments to show your support. Thank you so much, and the next one is titled Fix It Now. And by the way, this is a funny story from r/malicious compliance. So I was working in a hotel in the UK as a lobby boy. My afternoon job was to handle guest requests like extra pillows, blankets, etc. The system worked like this. The guests informed the reception, the details were written in a notebook, for example, room XY pillow, and every so often I checked the book, solved the problems, and ticked them off when done. One night during dinner, the hotel boss wrote a note in the book that said, "Room XXX, hot water tap is not working." I went to the room, checked it, and yep, not working. I went back and wrote in the book, can't fix it, call a plumber. On my next round there was a new message that said, fix it now, underlined 3 times. Well, I went back to the room, checked the hot water tap again. In the UK there are 2 taps on the sink, one for cold and one for hot, but still couldn't fix it. I tried a few things until somehow the pipe, the one from the wall to the sink, popped out and boiling hot water started pouring onto the floor at full force. Panic mode on, I grabbed the room phone and called reception. Busy, so I sprinted through the hotel. The room was on the farthest side, jumped into reception and shouted, "Room XY, plumber now!" Then I rushed back to the room. The water was still gushing out at full force, so I just sat on the edge of the bathtub, holding the pipe so that the water poured into the tub instead of flooding the floor. After about 3 minutes of this, the hotel boss peeked into the bathroom, went pale, and ran away. 5 more minutes passed, then the fire alarms went off because of the steam. Fortunately, the staff already knew what was happening, so they told the guests that it was a false alarm and didn't evacuate the hotel. Another 10 minutes later, they finally shut off the water supply for the entire wing of the hotel. A plumber arrived and fixed the tap in 3 minutes. Well, now came the fun part. Cleaning. Surprisingly, there wasn't much water in the bathroom, considering the tap had been gushing for over 15 minutes, so I went 1 floor lower to see where all that water had gone. I entered the room's bathroom, switched on the light, but it was very dim. That is when I realized the bowl-shaped lamp cover on the bathroom ceiling was filled to the brim with water, with the light bulb happily sitting inside of it. Oh damn, light off, drained the water from the lamp cover, mopped up that bathroom too, but still it didn't seem like enough water for what had happened, so I went even lower. Below that bathroom on the ground floor, there was a corridor, luckily not another room. But the ceiling had gotten so wet that it collapsed. A 2 by 3 meter section of it had come crashing down onto the carpet. After 15 minutes in a sauna-like bathroom, 30 minutes of cleaning and clearing the rubble, I finally stepped outside for some fresh air. That is when my roommate walked past, took one look at me and asked, "Did someone puke on you?" Since then, whenever I say I cannot fix something, they actually believe me and call a professional. And the next one is a funny petty revenge story. So I've lived with a friend for 7 years now and he's a nice enough guy, but over the years he has gotten more and more lazy. We have a dishwasher, but he will leave his used dishes out for days, he never cleans, he has long hair that he leaves in the shower drain, and he expects me to do the laundry. You can imagine, I'm getting pretty fed up with his behavior and I've asked him to at least clean up after himself, but he always forgets after a few days. Lately, he started forgetting his keys too and calls me if I'm out, so I will have to come back home to let him in. Of all the things he does, this is the most annoying because I have to drop what I'm doing just to go help him. Well, after the 3rd time I had enough and I told him, if you forget your keys again, I won't come home. If you wanna hide an extra key in the shed for when you forget your keys, you will have to pay for it yourself. He said he would, he makes more money than me anyway, but lo and behold, he never did. The next time he forgot his keys was a cold and rainy day, and I told him again that I was done dropping everything for him, but I would come home once I was done with my shopping. Well, just to be extra petty, I went into a few extra stores and really took my time deciding on what to buy. When I got home, he was sitting in the shed, mostly dry but very cold. He never bought an extra key, but he never again forgot his own after that. And now let's move on to the next story. It starts like this. So one thing I love about my home is the fresh smell of the morning dew hitting my face as I have my first sip of coffee in the morning, sitting on my porch, and from there I can see almost all the land that surrounds me, the big trees and the leaves falling off. My family has owned this land for decades and it has many hidden treasures inside. One of those treasures is Earl, one of the trees sitting at the end of the property. Earl is a Great Basin bristlecone pine tree that has been sitting on this land for as long as I can remember and for as long as my father and grandfather could remember as well. Its value was hundreds of thousands of dollars because of how old this ancestral tree was. It was named Earl because of my great-grandpa, who lived a long healthy life just like the tree, which still remained. We had theories of it being older than the house or the entire county around it. But the thing is, Big Earl was here long before us and was gonna be long after we all left as well, or that's at least what I thought, because apparently, no matter how strong and big it was, how many storms and heat waves it had endured, Earl had never met something like a Karen. So Karen did not seem that nice already when she moved to the house next to us. She was polite but had a bit of a fake smile and a scrunched nose every time you tried to say something to her. as if something just smelled bad, but she didn't do anything to bother us, at least at first. That was until Karen got the brilliant idea of putting a fence around her property. She walked around the place between the grass and the trees, with a contractor following her as he tried to take notes of her quick gibberish. According to her, the area boundaries were not clear and she wanted to fix that, so she got the property plans and thought of a big fence to solve that. Until she reached Earl. According to Karen and her fence, Earl's branches were on her property and she asked, well, not exactly, she demanded that I cut them that same afternoon when she came knocking on my door under the pouring rain. I tried to talk to her and I told her that we would review it when the rain had stopped, and her face contorted in a way I had not seen before, but she dropped the subject and just left. My husband and I thought about checking whatever issues Karen had with the property borders that afternoon, but the rain did not stop, and apparently Karen's plan for the fence did not stop either, because imagine my surprise when I heard a weird sound in the distance at night. A weird metallic sound followed by a clashing noise. I did not think much of it, but in the morning, as I sat on the porch as I usually do, the view in front of my eyes had something different that day, and unfortunately I saw Earl was gone. I almost jumped in my spot when I realized this and immediately called my husband as if I feared that I've gone mad and I was just imagining things. He was as shocked as me when he noticed the branches of the big old tree missing from the landscape. Good old Earl laid on the floor, now a felled tree, after all of those decades of standing proudly in our property, and I just felt a mix of rage and sadness that ate me alive inside like nothing had done before. My husband tried to call my name, but it was too late. I was already on my way to Karen's door, with rage running through my veins. She opened the door as if nothing had happened with her scrunched nose when I asked about the tree. "Well, I told you it was in my property and you did not even do anything about it," she tried to reply to me. Even when I told her the value of the tree she had just cut off, she just shrugged and tried to brush the issue off, saying it was some old rotten tree anyway, and that she, yes you heard me right, she was gonna sue me because the tree fell on her car, since apparently they sucked at physics in school and her idiot husband and his friends cut down the tree in a stupid way. I was not gonna drop the issue, of course. She had trespassed on my property in the middle of the night to cut off a piece of history that was worth thousands of dollars, as if it was just a minor thing. We had to get the property line surveilled to prevent anything else from escalating further. And by the way, ripe stars, unfortunately I had to censor a lot of personal information there because OP was, in my opinion, sharing too much, and he might have gotten doxxed if I would have read that in a YouTube video. And really, I don't want to expose anyone's privacy, so that's why I tend to censor things like that. Either way, a few days later I got a lawsuit notice from Karen for the damages that, according to her, I had inflicted on her car. I could not believe my own eyes when I saw that paper, but I was confident though that we were not in the wrong here. She was the one that had illegally come into our property to destroy a piece of it, and nature had done the rest of the job. Luckily for us, so showed the evidence. The surveillance proved that our ancestral tree was always on our property, and there was not even a centimeter of it passing onto Karen's land. She had no right to cut it in the first place, let alone without our permission and by her own means, and let's not even talk about her car. We had absolutely nothing to do with that. You should have seen her face when she was ordered to not only pay the legal costs, but also the $185,000 for the worth of the tree that she had taken from us, and also we have to add to that the fact that she lost her brand new car too. Her face was so red that it seemed as if it was gonna explode with rage. She did not say a word as her face slowly contorted and her nose lifted in its usual manner. A little vein in her forehead appeared to be about to pop off at any given second. I think she wanted to say and do so many things to us, but she didn't do so because we were in front of a judge, and you wouldn't believe the other things we found out about our dear neighbor Karen. She seemed to have a big record of harassing past neighbors through legal threats. She did this from one house to another, to any place she landed on, but I'm guessing neither of her previous feuds had cost her so greatly as this one did. Because Karen not only had to pay the amount that I mentioned before, she also ended up facing criminal charges for trespassing our property and for destroying our tree and for abuse of litigation. She ended up behind bars for a significant amount of time. Karen had a history of harassment and threatening her neighbors in the past, using legal tools to back up her insane claims and complaints. However, this frivolous lawsuit together with her impulsive actions crossed criminal territory on this occasion, resulting in felony charges for her. As for me, I still sit on my porch in the mornings feeling the morning dew hit my face, with my view having one tree missing unfortunately from its usual splendor, but with justice definitely being served. Before we end the video, we will read one last funny story from r/petty revenge. It is titled "The Kitten I Adopted Out of Spite." So my then 15-year-old daughter and I visited the local humane society on a weekly basis. It was free therapy for her, as cuddling the kittens and watching them play was a great endorphin rush. We were in the kitten room when a little girl, maybe 6 or 7, entered with her father. I watched as she manhandled the kittens, picking them up by their legs, hitting one on the head after it swiped her, and listened to her whiny voice saying, "That one is ugly," or "Yuck, look at his eyes, that's gross," about a kitten with an obviously healing eye injury. She eventually zeroed in on the only little orange and white kitten, who was very chill despite her aggressive handling of it. She declared to her dad after a few moments that this was the one she wanted. Her dad asked if she was sure, and she said yes. She spent a few more minutes holding him up in the air, bouncing him around like a ball, and just really being a bad little girl. I stood up and went to the wall where all the cage cards were and quickly found the sheet for the only orange kitten in the room. I took it out of the slot and sat back down. After a few more minutes, I walked up to the little girl and nicely said, "Can I please have him? We are adopting him." She glared at me and said, "No, he's mine." Her dad walked over and I said, "We had visited him earlier. We even have his cage card. I'm sorry." He told his daughter to hand over the kitten, and she lost her mind. She carried on and screamed like a spoiled brat for 5 minutes while holding on to the terrified kitten who was trying to get away. She only wanted the orange one and didn't like any of the other ugly kittens. It took her dad yelling at her to get her to finally throw the kitten across the room and stomp away. My daughter went and picked up the kitten, and long story short, Otis has now been happily living his best life in my home for 7 years, and we love him so much. I hope the little twat never got a kitten. And yeah guys, thank you so much for watching. I will see you again tomorrow.